Welcome to Mindset Mondays, the weekly bite-sized podcast designed to build a happier, healthier headspace. Think of it as a learning snack for your morning commute to set your week up right. I'm Mark Holloway, and today's episode is one I think is going to make a lot of things suddenly make sense. Have you ever noticed that you're sharpest and most decisive in the morning, and by evening you can barely choose what to have for dinner? That you're brilliant at saying no to things at 9 a.m, and somehow find yourself agreeing to things at 6 p.m. that you absolutely wouldn't have agreed to earlier in the day? That your willpower feels almost limitless at the start of the week, but completely hollowed out by Thursday? That's not a weakness. That's not laziness. That's decision fatigue, and it's one of the most well-documented and least talked about forces shaping your life every single day. Today, we're going into what it is, what the science tells us, how some of the world's highest performers have structured their lives around it, and 2 actionable changes you can make this week to protect your best thinking. Let's get into it. The human brain makes an extraordinary number of decisions every day. Estimates vary. You'll sometimes see the figure 35,000 decisions per day cited, which sounds almost absurdly high until you start counting the micro decisions that most of us never consciously register. What to look at when you open your phone, whether to respond to that message now or later, which route to walk, what to eat, whether to speak up in that meeting, whether to push back on that email or let it go. The problem is that decision making is cognitively expensive. Every choice you make draws on the same finite pool of mental energy, and as that pool depletes throughout the day, something very specific starts to happen to the quality of those decisions. Psychologists identify 2 primary patterns of impaired decision-making under fatigue. First, impulsivity. You stop carefully weighing options and just grab whatever feels easiest or most immediately rewarding. The biscuit at 4 p.m, the glass of wine you didn't plan to have in the evening, the snappy reply to the email you should have slept on. Second, avoidance. You start deferring decisions entirely, defaulting to whatever or avoiding making any choice at all. You procrastinate on the important thing because your brain simply doesn't have the resources to engage with it properly. Both of these are your brain's way of conserving energy. It's not failing you, it's protecting you. But the consequences can be significant, particularly when the decisions you're making late in the day are the ones that actually matter. The research on decision fatigue is extensive, and one of the most striking studies is also one of the most sobering. In 2011, psychologists Danziger, Levav, and Avnaim Piso published research examining the decisions of an Israeli parole board over a 10-month period. They analysed more than 1,100 parole hearings, and what they found was remarkable. Prisoners who appeared before the board early in the morning at the start of the session were granted parole approximately 65% of the time. Prisoners who appeared later in the session, as the judge's mental resources were depleting, were granted parole at rates that dropped toward near zero before each break. After a food break, the judges had eaten and rested, the approval rate shot back up to around 65%, then dropped again as the session wore on, then recovered after the next break. The judges weren't consciously varying their standards. They weren't aware that the time of day was influencing their decisions. But as their cognitive resources depleted, they defaulted to the easier, safer, lower risk option, which in a parole hearing means keeping someone incarcerated. The consequences for those prisoners were life-altering, and the only variable was when in the session their case was heard. This is decision fatigue at its starkest, but it plays out in smaller, quieter ways in your life every single day. The American Psychological Association has described decision fatigue as a genuine form of ego depletion, a term coined by social psychologist Roy Baumeister, whose research throughout the 1990s and 2000s established that willpower and decision-making draw on a shared but limited resource. Baumeister compared it to a muscle. It can be exercised and strengthened over time, but within any given day it fatigues. And once it's fatigued, your self-regulation, your ability to make thoughtful, intentional choices degrades. Now, there has been some academic debate about the specifics of ego depletion as a model. Some replication studies have produced mixed results, but the broader phenomenon of decision quality declining with cognitive load is robustly supported. The direction of the effect is not in question. The more decisions you make, the harder the next one becomes. Let's make this concrete, because I want you to recognize your own patterns here. At work, do you notice that your most creative strategic thinking happens in the morning? That by mid-afternoon you're in reactive mode, responding to things rather than driving them? That the meetings you schedule late in the day tend to produce worse outcomes than the ones you have first thing? This is decision fatigue. Your brain started the day with a full tank, and the work of the morning, email, Slack messages, small judgments, interruptions, has been drawing it down all day. With food and health, the research on this is consistent and fairly predictable. Healthy eating is hardest in the evening, not because your intentions have changed, but because your self-regulation has degraded. The person who eats well all day and then raids the kitchen at 9 p.m. isn't a hypocrite. They're someone who has used up their decision-making resources and whose brain is defaulting to immediate reward. In relationships, some of the worst conversations happen in the evening. The snappy response to a partner, the argument that escalates over something minor, the short fuse with the kids. Part of this is tiredness, but a significant part is that by evening, your capacity for the kind of thoughtful, regulated communication that good relationships require has been worn down. You're just running on empty. With big decisions, this is perhaps the most important one. People often try to tackle significant decisions, career changes, financial choices, difficult conversations in the evenings because that's when they have uninterrupted time. But that's precisely when their decision-making quality is at its lowest. The combination of a big decision and a depleted brain is a recipe for poorer outcomes. Here's where it gets interesting, because some of the most successful people in the world have structured their lives explicitly around this phenomenon, even if they didn't always use the term decision fatigue. Barack Obama, when he was President of the United States, gave a revealing interview to Vanity Fair in which he explained that he only ever wore grey or blue suits. His reasons? I'm trying to pare down decisions. I don't want to make decisions about what I'm eating or wearing because I have too many other decisions to make. He was making a deliberate choice to reduce the number of trivial decisions he faced each day in order to preserve his cognitive resources for the decisions that actually mattered: running the country, deciding on policy, navigating crises. Mark Zuckerberg famously adopted a near-identical approach. The grey t-shirt and jeans uniform wasn't laziness or fashion minimalism, it was a cognitive strategy. I feel like I'm not doing my job if I spend any of my mental energy on things that are silly or frivolous, he's once quoted as saying. Steve Jobs was perhaps the most iconic example of this kind of decision simplification. The black turtleneck and blue jeans every day, without exception. Jobs was meticulous about protecting his creative and strategic thinking by eliminating the low-stakes decisions that would otherwise nibble away at his mental bandwidth. These aren't isolated quirks. They reflect an understanding, intuitive or deliberate, that cognitive resources are finite and must be managed. But decision fatigue management goes beyond wardrobe choices. Look at how elite performers structure their days. Charles Darwin famously split his working day into 3 focused 2-hour blocks, one in the morning after breakfast, one mid-morning, and one in the late afternoon, with significant rest and recovery time built in between. His most demanding thinking happened early. His afternoons were walks, correspondence, light reading. He understood, without the neuroscience to back it up in those days, that sustained decision-making depleted something important. Maya Angelou wrote in hotel rooms that she rented specifically for the purpose, rooms she kept entirely bare, so there was nothing to engage with, nothing to decide about, nothing to distract from the work. She'd arrive at 6:30 a.m., write until 2 p.m., then leave. The entire environment was designed to reduce cognitive load and protect her creative capacity. Warren Buffett, widely considered one of the greatest decision makers in history, is famously ruthless about what he gives his attention to. He estimates he spends 80% of his working day reading and thinking, making very few actual decisions. His view is that most of the value he creates comes from a handful of high-quality decisions per year, and that protecting the quality of those decisions means not depleting himself on the hundreds of lower stakes ones that fill most people's days. The common thread across all of these people is this: they understand that their best thinking was a finite resource and they managed it accordingly. One piece of the science here is the role of physical restoration in decision quality. The parole board study noted something crucial. After a food break, the judge's approval rates recovered almost immediately. Subsequent research has explored why, and glucose appears to play a significant role. Decision-making draws on glucose as a fuel source, and as blood sugar drops, so does decision quality. Now, this isn't a license to eat sugar all day, but it does suggest that regular breaks, meals, and physical movement are not luxuries, they're cognitive maintenance. Skipping lunch to power through the afternoon is likely costing you more in decision quality than you're gaining in time. Sleep is also critical here. Research by neuroscientist Matthew Walker, author of Why We Sleep, shows that sleep-deprived people are dramatically worse at decision-making, more impulsive, less accurate, less able to anticipate consequences. And critically, they are largely unaware of how impaired they are. They feel fine. Their actual performance, though, is not fine. We covered sleep back in episode 10, but it's worth connecting it here. Every night of good sleep essentially resets your decision-making capacity. Every night of poor sleep starts your next day with a deficit. So, what do we actually do with all of this? Here's a practical framework. Principle 1. Front load the important stuff. Your most cognitively demanding tasks, the strategic work, the creative thinking, the important decisions, the difficult conversations, belong in the morning. Not because you necessarily feel more awake, but because your decision-making resources are freshest. Guard your mornings aggressively. If possible, don't let email or meetings consume the first hours of the day. Principle 2. Reduce trivial decisions wherever you can. This doesn't mean you have to wear the same outfit every day, but look at your day and honestly identify where you're making unnecessary micro decisions. Meal planning at the weekend instead of deciding what to eat every evening. A weekly schedule that removes the daily decision of what to work on. Batching similar tasks together so you're not context switching constantly, because every context switch is a small decision. Principle 3. Protect your breaks. Breaks aren't a reward for getting work done. They're part of how work gets done. Regular breaks, especially ones that involve movement, food, or genuine rest, help restore cognitive function. The most productive people are often not the ones who work the longest hours, but the ones who are most intentional about recovery. Principle 4. Make important decisions early. If you have a significant decision to make, financial, professional, relational, try to make it in the morning. If you find yourself facing a big choice in the evening, it's worth asking, am I in the right state to make this decision, or shall I sleep on it? Sleeping on it is not weakness or indecision, it's cognitive strategy. So, here are your 2 practical shifts for the coming week. Mindset shift 1. Map your decision load. For one day this week, just one, keep a rough log of the decisions you make. Not every micro decision, but a general awareness. Notice when you're making high-stakes decisions and when in the day they're falling. Notice where you're wasting cognitive resources on trivial choices that could be systematized, delegated, or even just eliminated. At the end of the day, ask yourself, what were the 3 most important decisions I made today, and when did I make them? If your most important decisions are consistently happening in the afternoon or evening, that's a signal worth acting on. Start to deliberately move your significant thinking and decision-making earlier in the day, even by an hour. The impact on quality can be substantial. Mindset shift 2. Create one decision-free zone. Pick one area of your life where you currently make a daily decision and systematize it for this week. It could be breakfast. Decide now what you're eating every morning this week and remove that decision entirely. It could be your morning routine. Write down the sequence once and follow it without deliberating. It could be your workout. Decide now what you're doing and when, so you're not negotiating with yourself each day about whether, when, and how. The point isn't to make your life rigid and joyless. It's to demonstrate to yourself, through direct experience, how much mental energy gets freed up when you remove unnecessary daily choices. Even eliminating one repeated daily decision can meaningfully reduce your cognitive load. Stack a few of these over time, and you'll notice a genuine shift in the quality of your thinking and the energy you bring to what actually matters. So, let's bring this all together. Your brain is remarkable, but it is not infinite. Every decision you make draws from the same pool of cognitive resources. As the day goes on, the quality of your choices degrades, not because you're weak, but because you're human. This is a feature of how we're wired, not a flaw in your character. The good news is that once you understand this, you can design your day around it. You can front load what matters, you can eliminate unnecessary choices, you can protect your breaks, your sleep, your mornings. You can stop making important decisions at the exact moment your brain is least equipped to make them. Obama knew it, Buffett knows it, Darwin knew it in his bones, and now you know it too. So this week, map your decision load, create one decision-free zone. Thank you so much for listening to Mindset Mondays. If this episode was useful, share it with someone who could use a better week. I'll see you next Monday.